Dobry wieczór, witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie na trzecim wykładzie w ramach naszego webinarium Early Music Plus. Webinarium organizowane jest przez program Sztuka Doskonałości w Akademii Muzycznej imienia Feliksa Nowoickiego w Bydgoszczy. No i dzisiaj mam taką przyjemność powitać pana Benoît Dratwickiego, który wygłosi wykład na temat muzyki francuskiej. Benoît Dratwicki, historyk oraz dyrektor Centrum Muzyki Barokowej w Wersalu. Postać niezwykła, ale osoba też zajmująca się przede wszystkim operą francuską, zwłaszcza tą z XVIII wieku. No, specjalista w tej dziedzinie, także dla mnie, jako miłośnika muzyki francuskiej, niezwykła przyjemność Benoît powitać na tym wykładzie. Temat wykładu to śpiew i gra aktorska w operze paryskiej od Ludwika XIV do rewolucji w oparciu o źródła. Także bardzo ciekawy temat i taki u nas niespotykany, także mam nadzieję, że wszyscy słuchacze docenią tutaj ten temat i no, zwłaszcza dlatego, że specjalista z tej dziedziny po prostu ten wykład dla nas poprowadzi. Hello Benoît. It's very nice that we can meet again here, only here online, but it's nice to meet you, and I hope that well, I know that you can speak endless about French music and French opera, and it's always so interesting. But I leave you now here not to take too much time. I just hope that the rain outside will not disturb your lecture, and that the connection will be good, that everything will work out. So welcome, and well, let's hope that we all will have a great fun hearing your wonderful lecture.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be there with you. And thanks to the situation, I think there are a lot of international exchanges, and that's great. Yes. Well, I will share my screen so that you can see my lecture. And it's here like that. Yes. Well, today I will speak about the question of singing and acting as a singer and actor at the Paris Opera from the time of Louis XIV until the French Revolution. That means more or less during the Baroque era, end of 17th century and 18th century. And I will speak mainly about the idea of singing and acting according to the sources. The history of the Paris Opera is quite complicated because it's one of the oldest national opera house in the world. You can see that the beginning of the reign of Louis XIV is in 1660, around these years, because his mother was still somewhere around him. And the creation of the Paris Opera is in 1669. 3 years after, Lully, the famous Jean-Baptiste Lully, became the director and will compose around 15 operas during that time. Then composers like Campra, Destouches, Marat, and others will continue the tradition of this French opera. I will speak about that later. In 1723, it's the beginning of the reign of Louis XV. And as you can see, during this reign, Rameau will be the main composer. He will compose more than 30 opera from 1733 to 1760. In 1774, it's the beginning of the reign of Louis XVI with the famous Queen Marie Antoinette. And as you can see, the same year, it's the arrival of Gluck, the German composer in Paris. And Gluck will create a kind of revolution in the history of French opera. I would tell no more Baroque, but really classical. Gluck will leave Paris in 1779, and then you will have a lot of composers, either French or foreigners, like Sacchini, Salieri, or Piccini, who will continue the tradition, this new tradition created by Gluck. In 1789, the French Revolution, and in 1791, the Royal Academy of Music will become the national opera, and it still exists nowadays. The first thing which is interesting, if you want to try to understand how people were singing at the time on stage, it's the question of the buildings. The Paris Opera is installed in the Palais Royal, close to the Louvre, a big palace in the center of Paris, and the Opera House is exactly on the right side of the screen. Nowadays, the same building is the Ministry of Culture. Here you can see a map of the Paris Opera in 1752, and so you can see that the stage is close to the garden, and the room for the audience is close to the street. This hall was used from the beginning, exactly from 1673 until 1763, when it was destroyed by the fire. It was totally destroyed, it burned, and as you can see, nothing survived. This fire in 1763 is important because it's 1 year before the death of Rameau. But in fact, in the destruction, a lot of sets and costumes were destroyed. Fortunately, not the scores, because the library were not close to the building. But because of this destruction, a lot of things will change. Because the old score won't be performed anymore, and as the new building will have a worse acoustic, and as the orchestra will grow up, I will speak about that later, for the singer, it will be more demanding for them on stage, and they will change their way of singing. And so it's the beginning of what they call the hurlo francese, le hurlement français. That means the people will begin to sing with big voices, and it will destroy the tradition of the Baroque singing coming from the end of the 17th century. At that moment, the opera house will go in another palace close to the Louvre also, the Palace of Tuileries, and in a very, very big hall named Salle des Machines, they will take half of the superficie to build a new opera, which will be used during 10 years approximately. But it's so big that for the singers, for their voice, it will be very difficult to be heard. A new opera house is built in 1770 at the same place than the precedent one, at the Palais Royal, more modern, but also with a quite bad acoustic, which will still be very demanding for the singers and for the availability to be heard with a big orchestra in a big room. This building will be destroyed a second time by another fire in 1781, just after Gluck left Paris. And this second destruction will also create a kind of new generation because from the old repertory, only the scores by Gluck will survive, and nothing of the old opera will be performed anymore after this second destruction. For example, the last performances by Rameau will be exactly at that moment. After this destruction, a new opera house, the fourth one, during the 18th century, will be built in the north of Paris at the Place Saint-Martin. Not a really good place because it's, as you can see on this drawing, out of the city. It's even the beginning of the countryside, so it will be quite complicated to make the people come there. And this place will be used only for 20 years. It will be even closed during the French Revolution, as you can see here, during the first days of the Revolution. As you can see, there was several buildings, but in fact, the same one has been used from the beginning of the history of the opera until 1763. That means for all the time of Lully and Rameau. And we can really consider that the destruction of this building and the revolution of the style by Gluck will be the main subject, which will more or less destroy the tradition of Baroque singing in France on stage. Maybe it's interesting for you to see the dimensions of the stage at the time. So it's only the depth on the stage and the width on the stage. And you can see in red this main hall used from the beginning until 1763. It was 17 meters on one side, 9.5 meters on the other side. And if you compare, you can see that it's really, really smaller than the opera of the Royal Opera in Versailles, really smaller than the Opéra Garnier, the National Opera House that you can still see nowadays in Paris. But in fact, it's exactly the size of the opera named Opéra Comique in Paris, which still exists and which is nowadays the best place to perform Baroque opera in Paris. And one of the reasons is that it's exactly the same dimensions than the opera house at the time. The audience is more or less 1,200 seats. So at the time it was this, and nowadays the Opera Comique is exactly this also. If we go inside the building, let's go first on the stage because it's the place where you have to sing. Here is the only drawing we have for the stage of the Paris Opera before it was destroyed. This drawing is from 1761. For sure, it's not exactly what was inside. We can see that the proportions are not really good. But what is interesting is that you can see the orchestra and see that the musicians are mainly turned in front of, they are looking the stage and not looking the audience. That means they are on the opposite sense that nowadays. And the second thing very important is that you can see that the main singers in the middle, they are not really on the stage, but they are on the proscenium, which is something in front of the stage, a space, more or less 3 meters, in front of the stage, which makes the singer sing in the concert hall and not in the sets and in the decorations. And so you can see that it's totally different from nowadays because the main singers are really in the concert hall, very close to the audience and for sure close to the orchestra, and the orchestra is looking at them. So you can imagine that there is a kind of chamber music atmosphere for the recitative on stage at the time. Here is another drawing later in 1774, I think. It's for an opera by Floquet. And what is interesting with this drawing, you can see also one time more the orchestra and the conductor, but it's that you can see a lot of people on stage, and we know from a lot of different descriptions that the stage in Paris was very busy because you have a lot of soloists, you have a big choir, you have a ballet, and you have sometimes even machines and people who are not dancing and not singing, but just there to make something a big show. And so the stage was very busy at the time. It's also why the singers have to come in the middle of the stage in front of the orchestra, more or less out of the stage on this proscenium. In French, it's named avant-scène, because it's the only place where they can be more or less alone and able to sing quietly. This drawing is not depicting the Paris Opera House. It's another opera in France, in Lille, in the north of France. It's around 1750. And this drawing is interesting because it shows how the dancers and the singers are sharing the stage during a French opera, because you know that regularly in each act you have some ballets. And during the ballets, the main singer, if they are supposed to be on stage, they will go on each side of the stage, and you can see there 2 on one side, even in fact 4 on one side and 4 on the other side. They are on this part named the proscenium, and in the middle you can see a dancer, and behind her other dancers ready to come on stage. And so it's very interesting because this central position is shared alternatively by the singers and the dancer during the show. I will speak a little bit about the sets because it's one of the typical French speciality, and also because all these sets and machines on stage will make the singer sing in a different way than just a normal concert. As you can see, for example, on this title page of Atis by Lully, the title is Atis, Tragédie en musique, tragedy with music, ornés d'entrées de ballets, de machines et de changements de théâtre. Ornamented with ballets, machine, and theater action. That means, you see, nowadays we only consider that an opera is a score, but in France, an opera is not only a score. And on this title page, it's told to be a tragedy. That means first a text, en musique, that means then a score, but with ballet, machine, and sets. And so ballet, machine, and sets, and poetry are as important as the music itself. And so if you want to consider the French opera, you really have to consider not only the score, but also all what is around the score. For the sets, the Paris Opera is very well prepared, and you can see here a view of the stage with all the machinery, and you can see that there are a lot of options to put decoration on stage. You can see also here another view of the same building. It's quite complicated because it's technology, so I will not speak about this today, but it's very interesting, and you can find all this in the encyclopedia. You have more or less 60 pages of this kind of printed maps, and it really helps us to understand how it was working at the time. And so the result is that we still have a lot of drawings which are supposed to help the preparation of the decoration. So that means it's not the final decoration, but it helps to understand. And so you see here, for example, it's for the opera Circe by Desmarais. You can see the sea, a castle, some boats, some forests, and demons flying with clouds. So you understand that it can be a super production with everything moving and being destroyed, etc. Here you can see also from Attis by Lully, a very beautiful palace. In the middle, Attis is sleeping with singer around him. And from the left side of the stage, you have all these clouds coming with the dreams and the nightmares of Attis. Some are singing and some are dancing. Later in the 18th century, the style will be totally different with a kind of classical architecture. And for example, here you have the Palace of Armide for Armide by Gluck, and here a temple for Alceste by Gluck. During the year 70, 70. You see that there is a kind of monumental attitude. I would tell something very classical, but very impressive for the spectators. At the same time, there is this taste for classical things, but also for medieval and Gothic things. And we are not waiting for the 19th century for this medieval romantic feeling. And already here for Castor et Pollux music by Candey in 1791, you can see a mix between antiquities and medieval buildings. At the same time, there are also this kind of decoration, totally Egyptians. It's for Nephte in 1791, the same years. And you see it's a kind of exact reproduction of the temple of Luxor. Little bit earlier, in 1785, for Panurge dans l'île des Lanternes by Grétry, the story takes place in China, and you see that they can rebuild exactly Chinese temple on stage at the Paris Opera. And at the same time, a Peruvian temple for La Conquête du Pérou by Candey also, with all the details, which are, as you can see, and as far as I know, totally Peruvian. So you can see the sets and the decoration were very impressive, with a taste for mythology, for exotism, for history. And for the singers, it means that they were supposed to go everywhere on stage and to be able to be listened in all this situation in a temple. You can see here on these different elements. And so it's totally different from the Italian opera, where more or less nothing happens on stage and the singer can stay in the middle in front of the audience and sing his long da capo arias. there is a question of sets, but there is also the question of machines, which are even more complicated for the singers, because first it's moving, and secondly it's sometimes very backstage or on the upper part of the stage, so quite complicated. Here, for example, there is a monster eating some princesses. We don't know exactly how it was working, but you can imagine that this was happening backstage, and the poor ladies were certainly singing their last words from the back of the stage in this enormous mouth of the monster. So you can see the action was very demanding for the singers. Here it's the opposite. It's a god, certainly Cupid, coming out of the sea on a big machine, and he will certainly come from backstage until in front of the stage, close to the orchestra. Here it's some clouds moving in the sky with people singing in it. Sometimes it's quite easy like that, but sometimes it's more busy. Like here, we are in Proserpine by Lully for the prologue. And you can see that La Victoire, who was sung by Mademoiselle Ferdinand, she's in the middle, was accompanied by other singers on each side, but also by trumpet players. And in fact, in the score of Lully, there are 2 trumpet parts. And on this drawing, we can see 2 trumpets. And we can imagine, and we know in some situation, here we can only suppose it, that musicians were also in the machine with the singers. It means that for the singers, it was certainly complicated to be exactly with the orchestra, and that can explain why the accompaniment of some specific moments is quite typical, for example, with only the violins playing the bass parts, or with a singer singing only the bass parts, with flutes doing some small notes. It's really typical from all these goddesses in the glory in the sky, because certainly it was more helpful for them to sing in accompanied by such an orchestra. Sometimes it's even more impressive, because you can see here a palace on a palace in the sky. So it was certainly very impressive for everybody. And here it's, I think, the end of Cadmus et Hermione by Lully. You can see all the singers, that means the soloists, the choir, and the dancers. And you can see here a palace on a palace in a palace. So certainly this end was very, very impressive. All these machines where the singer had to sing were moved by some in a technological way, very advanced and very scientific. And you can see, as I told you, all of them in the encyclopedia printed in 1753. You can see the detail of the machine like this. You can understand how everything works. Here, for example, you can understand how to make a boat move on the sea. So it's very complicated, but then it will move backstage like it is on water moving on the sea. Here you can see a machine to cross the stage in the sky, to put someone on it or something. Here you understand how to move several clouds in the sky with only 1 people on the left side of the theater. And on a lot of drawings, we can see exactly around the singer what is happening on stage, and it's exactly detailed what you have to do, where you have to put people, how you have to build everything. It's sometimes very helpful. For example, here you can see, I think it's Phaeton, and that one also is Phaeton in the sky with his horses. On some librettos, we have the annotations, which help us to understand what was done on stage. And with all this, I will not translate you because it's not so interesting, but here it's a libretto for Armide by Lully, quite late in the year 1770. And we can see exactly everywhere what is happening and what everybody has to do on stage, backstage, and everywhere to prepare the following scenes. Or, for example, here you see the last page, all the destruction of the palace of Armide. The costumes were as important as the sets, but for us, it's more important if we are speaking about singers, because the costumes is totally linked with the type of singers. For sure, you know that the voices of the time were not exactly the same voices than nowadays. For the ladies, there were more or less three types of sopranos. I mean, the light sopranos, which is a kind of coloratura. This voice appeared quite late during the year 1720 and was mainly used during the time of Rameau. And then you have the I would tell the normal soprano, more or less lyrical soprano, singing the princess and the good people. And you have a kind of second soprano or mezzo soprano named bas dessus, which were singing mainly either the mothers or the queens or the sorcerers. And so these three types of voices were linked with three types of character. That means the light soprano were singing light roles, the sopranos, dessus, were singing mainly princesses or nymphs or kind goddess, and the bas dessus mezzo-soprano were singing queens, mother, and sorcerers. For the men, there were mainly also three types of voices. The haute contre, which is a high tenor, mainly dedicated to the role of the princes and the lovers, the good guy, the heroes. Bass taille, which is a type of baritone or bass baritone, who were singing mainly the king, the grand priest, and the bad lovers, the jealous one. And finally, the taille, which is a kind of low tenor or high baritone, which were dedicated to smaller roles in general, and especially to allegory and some specific voice who appears only for some strange effects. This you can recognize in the costumes. And it's very interesting because if you work a little bit on this, either you can show me a score and I will tell you how they will be dressed, or you can show me some costumes and I will tell you what they will sing. See, it's mathematical. First of all, the costumes in general are very beautiful. This is the costume for Pluton in the opera Proserpine by Lully, by Bérain. And you can see that the costumes were very rich, very luxury, and they were told to be very beautiful in all Europe. And we were, for some times, even better than the Italian. So for the men, it was very luxurious, and also for sure for the ladies, like here, Médée in the opera Thésée by Lully, the details of the costumes were very well done. This can be explained because the costumes are paid and are the property of the Paris Opera. At the Comédie Française, that means the theater where they were performing spoken theater like Molière or Racine or Corneille, the costumes were the costumes of the actors themselves. And so maybe they did not have enough money to pay very luxurious things. At the Paris Opera, it's different. Here you can see also costumes from the time of Lully, a little bit later. It's for Le Sommeil in Attis by Lully. And it's very funny because 1 century after, Piccini, an Italian composer, will rewrite the music of Attis, the libretto by Quino, and we can find also the costume for the same character 1 century later in the opera by Piccini. And you see that Le Sommeil is now a lady, a soprano, and you see with a beautiful dress of clouds. And so it's funny to see how in 1 century the same character changed totally for the voice, but also for the costume. And finally, some costumes were very impressive because for allegory and bad characters, sometimes it was awful. Here, for example, this costume is a costume for a role, La Haine, which is a bad patient, sung by a male, but supposed to be a female. And so you can see that on the costume itself, there are some female attributes, but in fact, it was for a baritone. Sometimes the costumes were more linked with the idea of exotism or history. And here, for example, it's an opera named La Vénitienne, which takes place in Venice. And so the costumes is one of nobles from the Renaissance time on stage during the Baroque time. At the end of the 18th century, there will be a kind of revolution in the costumes, mainly pushed by Madame Saint-Huberty, a famous actress of the time, and she will try to change all these old type costumes and to go in the direction of something more antique. And this will be the beginning of the classical period, which will continue during the reign of Napoleon I. You can see here the costumes have totally changed in some years. And especially it's funny here because on the left side, you can see how Madame Saint-Huberty was dressed for the role of Didon. And on the right side, it's the project of costume for her by Bocquet, but she did not accept to sing with this dress in the old style. She wanted to be really dressed in the antique style. And so we can see the proposition on one side and the result on the other side. If we speak about the singers on stage at the Paris Opera, we first have to speak about the choir. The choir here at the time of Lully, it was 22 men and 12 ladies. That means 12 sopranos singing the dessus part. And in the 22 men, you have 1/3 which are haute contre, high tenor, 1/3 which are taille, second tenor, or first basses. It's a very high baritone part. And 1/3 which were basses. But this size of choir at the time of Lully, it's so 34 plus, in fact, 2 children, that means 36. The choir increased during the 18th century. At the end of the 18th century, there will be more than 50 singers in the choir. Please note that nowadays, when we do a French Baroque opera, in general, we have 20 or 24 singers. But the minimum at the time was 36. And in fact, it was more often 50 or 60. The choir, you can see, for example, in 1770 at the court for a special event, the marriage of Marie Antoinette and the future Louis XVI, there were 95 people singing in the choir. The disposition of the choir on stage was regularly always the same. That means all around the stage like that, because they did never come in the middle of the stage where only the dancers and the main soloists were supposed to go. And so they would always like that, divided in two. You have the first soprano at the beginning on the left side, the second soprano at the beginning in green on the right side, and then half of the haute contre in blue on one side, half of the haute contre in blue on the other side, etc., etc., etc. Here, for example, in the drawing of sets, you can see some decoration where the choir is installed, you can see on each side of the stage. Or here, the same decoration for the same situation, the end of Belle au fond by Lully, but a little bit later. And you can see also that the choir is in the same disposition. For the soloist singers, I spoke about the voices, but let's speak a little bit more about the genre. At the Paris Opera, there was, at the beginning, at the time of Lully, 14 soloist singers, 3 soloist basse taille, 3 soloist haute contre, 2 soloist taille, and 6 ladies. This number of 14 will increase during the 18th century, and there will be 38 soloists at the end of the 18th century. So you can imagine a troupe of soloists of 38 people. In the details for the ladies, as I told you, we have 3 types of ladies. We have the one singing the sorceress and the queen that you can see on the left side. They have a baguette in the hand because it's magic. It gives them a magical power, or it's the scepter of the queen. In the middle, you can see the light soprano with fan, which is singing the best friend of the princess in general. And on the right side, you can see the crying princess with her tissue in the hand, which is typical from this kind of lyrical soprano, crying during all the opera. For the sorceress, the queen, and the mother, the color is always the same: red, yellow, gold, and green. This is linked with the passion, with the idea of blood, of fire, because they are burned from inside by the devil, by passion, by unloved affair, and so the color is typical for them. You can see here, for example, Mademoiselle Chevalier at the time of Rameau. She's depicted in these colors. You can see just a little bit after her, Mademoiselle Levasseur at the time of Gluck. Same thing in the same colors. You can see Madame Saint-Huberti in the role of Didon. Same things, more or less, in the same color. And the last one, in the same color, Mademoiselle Maillard during the French Revolution. The crying princess is devastated. She's crying all the time. She is loved, but she cannot love easily the hero because of the sorceress. And so as she's devastated, she has no blood anymore in her body, and she's really close to die. And so the costume depicts this situation, and the colors are always the blanc, the gray, the pale blue, or pale pink. And all the time, this tissue in the end. Among these ladies which were crying, we had Mademoiselle Desmatins with her tissue, Mademoiselle Maupin with her tissue, here at the time of Lully and just after him. Later, Marie Pellissier, who created Aricie in Hippolyte Aricie by Rameau. And the most famous one at the time of Rameau and Gluck, Sophie Arnoux, who were totally impressive in this type of role, and you can see always the color of the costumes. But on this portrait by Greuze, you can see that herself, physically, she was exactly the type of physique, body, and face which was expected in this type of role. For the men, we have the three voices and the three types of character. On the left, you can see a typical haute contre hero. In the middle, you can see a typical bass taille, baritone father and god. And on the right side, you can see a typical taille part, which are monsters or priests or allegory. For the bass taille, so it's mainly bass baritone. It's not really baritone because in general it's quite low. The first real baritone were later, during the year 1760, at the end of the time of Rameau. They mainly sing the kings, like here you can see in Attis by Piccini on the right and in Thésée by Lully on the left. They sing also grand priests, like here in Zoroastre or in Ismenias. It's quite typical from specific scene of procession and religion affairs in the Paris opera. And they sing especially the character of Hercule, maybe dressed like that, I don't know, but that you can find in a lot of operas. For the haute contre, it's easy because they sing the hero and the lover, and the hero is always ready to go to the war and to come back victorious. So you can see here Thésée on one side and Renaud on the other side, and you can immediately recognize the haute contre. But the haute contre not only sings the military hero, but also the shepherd in the more pastoral stories. And here you can see Monsieur Géliot, who was especially good in this kind of role. And as you can see, as he is a good one, the nice one, he is also dressed in pale blue, pale pink, and blanc, like her lover, his lover, the crying princess. Here is Monsieur Géliot, who was the main haute contre of the 18th century, the hero of all the opera by Rameau. And after him, Monsieur Legros, who created all the opera by Gluck. We have to consider also, if you want to understand this way of singing, the orchestra. You can see here the size of the orchestra, and especially look in the middle, 12 violins, 8 basses, that means 8 cello, and 2 plus 2 plus 3 violas, 8 oboes, flutes, bassoons, etc., etc. So the orchestra was very numerous and very noisy. That means in French Baroque opera, the singer had to sing a lot because without this, it was impossible for them to be heard. Here you can see a drawing depicting the Opéra Royal de Versailles, not the Paris Opera, but you can see on stage all the choir, the member of the choir, all the soloists in the middle of the stage, and in front of them you can see the orchestra with the harpsichord, with all the instruments. They were very numerous because there were around 70 musicians. And we have even here the detail of the orchestra in Versailles in 1770, and you can see, for example, that there are 12 first violins, 14 second violins, 8 bassoons, 12 cellists, etc., etc. So I let you imagine the size of the voices to be accompanied by such an orchestra. Nowadays, I never heard a French Baroque opera accompanied by such an orchestra, but this is one of my secret dreams. In the orchestra, you had a lot of players very famous, like Marat, depending the time, because it was during one century, but you had Marat, who conducted the orchestra at one moment, Jean Ferry Rebel, who was the harpsichordist of the orchestra, Campra, who was also conducting the orchestra, Dauvergne later also conducted the orchestra, or Gossec, one of the last to be responsible for the orchestra just before the French Revolution. And I want to finish with a lesson of singing at the Paris Opera during the year 1750, because you have to know that we are lucky enough to still have at the Paris National Library a lot of scores which were the score used by the singer to prepare their show on stage, with annotation by their teacher, because at the Paris Opera there was a school for all the singers, the member of the choir, but also for the main soloists. For sure, nowadays we mainly use the treaties dedicated to music and singing, and as you can see, there were a lot at the time. During one century, we have 35 treaties for singers. They are interesting, but in fact, they are only theory. If we want to understand how they were singing and acting at the Paris Opera, we also have to go to see the treaties for actors, because unfortunately, people nowadays don't use it for the opera and for all what is linked with music. But if you check them, and we have around 12 for all the period, you will understand that these treaties for actors are in fact also dedicated to musicians and to singers. But what is even more important are these separated, these parts from the singers. For example, here, this is a quite old one. This is the part for Mademoiselle Entier in the prologue of L'Europe Galante by Campra. And you can see this score, they were all manuscripts. They were done by the copyist of the Paris Opera. Some are very clean like that one. That means you have the handwriting of the copyist, but nothing else is written on it. Just rôle de Vénus dans le prologue de l'Europe Galante pour Mademoiselle Entier. Role of Venus in the prologue of l'Europe Galante for Mademoiselle Entier. But some of them are more annotated. And these annotations are interesting because, in fact, they are linked with some of the treaties that I showed you just before, and especially that one by Raparlier, Les Principes de Musique, in 1772. And you see on this page, he writes what the teacher should write themselves on the score of their students. And he writes the teacher should write on the lesson of their students the different way of the right pronunciation, the right agrément, the ornamentation, the places where you have to breathe and to stop the sentence when you cannot breathe anymore. That means he speaks about text, about ornaments, and about direction and the cutting of the sentences. Let's take just the example of this score. It's an anonymous score for the role of Sappho in Les Fêtes d'Ébé by Rameau. It's quite late, from 1764, but we know that all the annotation we'll find on it are by Monsieur Levasseur, who was a teacher of the Paris Opera School at the time. And if we check the score, we can compare it with this edition, which is the official edition of the same opera by Rameau, Les Fêtes d'Ébé. It's published in 1739. And so you see, here we have the vocal line in the edition, And here we have the vocal line in the manuscript used by a singer. So let's concentrate on the score used by the singer. And let's take only this beginning of the score. What we see first here, it's a general intention added by the teacher. Entendre regret. That means with regrets, with tender regrets. So we have only one annotation for the full aria. But if we check the same score later in other parts, you can see here a lot of annotation. Very happy, spoken with hope, speak tenderly, respectful, pray. And so, in fact, you can see all these addition by the teacher to help the singer to understand the general atmosphere and the general situation. The second thing that we can see here is the addition of articulation and way of speaking, as it's told in the treaty by Rapparlier. And see here, up of the line text, you see addition mainly of consonances. And so we can understand that the teacher asked her students to sing Bois chéri des amours, que vous étiez charmant quand vos retraites sombres, etc., etc. It's very interesting because we can understand that the consonants are more important than the vowels, but also check mainly all the additions are on the upbeats. And so it means that the upbeats are more important than the beats. Bois chéri des amours, que vous étiez charmant quand vos retraites sombres, etc., etc. So this addition explains us on one part that the consonants are important, but also that the upbeat are more important than the beats. Another type of addition is the division of the sentence. And also Rapparlier in his treaty tells that the teacher should add the places where we have to breathe. And see here we can see this small sign which show where you have to cut a sentence. And so if you add these signs with the silence already existing in the score, we can see that at the time, the lines are very short for the singer. Look, Bois chéri des amours, que vous étiez charmant, quand vos retraites sombres, rassemblées sous leurs ombres, et les plaisirs, et mon amant, que vous étiez charmant. Okay, so it's funny, but in fact it shows that because the orchestra was so big, the stage was so big, and that they were sometimes backstage, in fact, to have a strong pronunciation and I think a strong way of singing, they were breathing a lot. And nowadays, when singers want to do long line, like in bel canto, like in Mozart and Del Rossini, I think they are totally wrong. And we have the proof in the sources, like here, that the idea is more to cut each half sentence, not each sentence, but each half sentence, to make a declamation stronger, in fact, because of this segmentation. You can see sometimes this small annotation S, which means in fact saisir, and saisir means in the dictionary that you have to go on. And so sometimes you see when it's added S, that means the sign of cutting plus S, it means you have to cut, but you have to continue immediately. Et les plaisirs, et mon amant, and not et les plaisirs, et mon amant, et les plaisirs, et mon amant. So that means small cut. So it's very interesting because we have even two types of cuts written in this course. Here we have even this symbol. It's not really a fermata because it doesn't mean you have to add a long coloratura. It's just a symbol as it's written in the traité by Lacassagne. It's a point de repos where you have to die with the sound before continuing. Another addition is the transformation of the rhythm. And it's very interesting because, you know, at the time in general in French music, we are supposed to have a kind of inégalité which make us always tan, ta, tan, ta, tan, ta, tam. But at the end of in the middle of the 18th century, in this score, we see that they transform the rhythm. And instead of doing tan, ta, tan, ta, tam, they will do ta, tan, tam, ta, ta, tam. Look on the second line. Normally, it should have been rassemblés sous leurs ombres, but the teacher changed the writing and he writes rassemblés sous leurs ombres. When you do this, it means that you don't have a regular alternative of long, short, long, short, long. Normally it's tan, ta, tan, ta, tan, ta, tan. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Here you have ta, 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 that means short, long, long, short, long, long. And if you have too long, one after the other, it puts you in a more lyrical way of singing. And I think this is the beginning of the new way of singing, more lyrical, when we don't want anymore to have this short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, which destroy, in fact, the line of the singer, but which is better for the French declamation. And we go to something like ta-ta-tam, ti-ta-tam, which make more long, long, short, long, long, short. And so you go in one way, small way, in a lyrical gesture. Check, for example, what is written and what is done. Here is the first publication in 1739, Confondés sous leurs ombres. But as there is inequality in French music, you will do tan, ta, tim, tin, ta, tam. In the general score, the full score manuscript in 1764, it's written exactly the same thing. Only one word changed. It's more confondé but rassemblé. But in the music, it's still written ta ta tam, ta ta tam. So you think, okay, so we will do ta ta tam, ta ta tam. And the only place where you find part of the solution is in the score of the soloist himself. We have a score from the revival of 1756, and you see a small changement. Here it's not tan tatin tan tatam, it's tan tatin tatam pam. We have in the middle this short long long which appears, and in 1764 it's even more because we have tati tam tita tam. So you see the evolution. But please see that it's only in the manuscript score for the singers themselves, the two last one of the page, that you find this difference of rhythm. You don't find him in the official scores, either published or manuscript. And so these scores for the singers, we have hundreds of them, have not been used from now on by the teachers and by the musicians. We are working on it in Versailles, but we just begin the work. But in fact, they are very, very, very useful for us. And I think finally, the last type of annotation from the teacher, it's what Rapparlier writes also when he speaks about the ornaments. And you can see here all these ornaments. The other one are already composed and done by Rameau in 1739, but all the one I show you are addition. There are new type of ornaments, and some are very specific from the year 1760. They did not exist 30 years before. So we have, for example, this, which is a martèlement, and we find it in the Principe de chant by L'Écuyer, and it's a pincé, in fact, it's tagran, tagran, tagran. But we have a lot in the scores of the time at the end of the 18th century. And also this ornament, very interesting, port de voix achevée, which means that the appoggiatura has to be short. It's not taham, it's taham. That means you have to go earlier on the real note. And it's also depicted by Rapparlier in 1772. And we can find also this ornament, which I call the pincé double, because there is no name for it. But we can find in some scores a way to do it, because you see in the vocal part, we find these things. And in the instrumental part, it's written more developed. And so we know, thanks to the violin part, how the singer has to sing it. Here and here. Okay, so that was mainly what I wanted to show you. For sure, I can speak, as Dorothea told you, during hours, but I have to stop now. I don't know if we need to have a break, because it looks like we can continue without break. Okay. So maybe I don't need to share anymore my screen. I give it to you once more. Here we are. And so if you have some question, for sure, I am here for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Benoît. It was, of course, you know that I'm a big fan of French music, so for me it's always so interesting to listen about this sources, especially that, well, here it's not so popular to look in these deep sources of vocal music and acting. You have eye on it, well, because of your position and because of your research. Well, Martin, our here in the office, will show me the question. So if anyone who was listening have some question, please write it, and then I will ask Benoît about it. But for now, I have, well, one my own, which, you know, I was listening to the lecture, and I know also some of your previous presentations, and you know the French opera is always in our imagination, and what we see on the stage during the good productions of it is always so rich, full, colorful, with costumes and the amount of singers and musicians that you were speaking about. It's always so extraordinary, and, well, it's not easy to say that for people who are not so deep in it and not working in institution who presents it. It's hard to imagine that, well, we could do it here somehow with our groups or with our institutions. What would you suggest? I mean, is it possible to make a good production of the opera? Of course, well, you need good singers and good musicians. That is the basic, which knows the style. And I'm not speaking only about the language and problems with it, but generally, as you can see, it needs so much. And what would you suggest if someone would like to start to product any of these French operas? Is it possible?
Yes, it's possible. And if you are interested in this, I suggest you to go on YouTube and to check Hippolyte et Aricie by Rameau. There was some years ago a wonderful production on stage at the Paris Opera. So it was conducted by Emmanuel Haïm and staged by Ivan Alexandre. And you can find all the production on YouTube, and the pictures are amazing because it was done exactly like it can have been done at the time. So this is a very good example. Well, from my point of view, I think that if you cannot do something really good, you should do nothing, because then it will look fake. That means if you have a good costumes, but if your hair are not nice, if you sing with your glasses, if the makeup is just approximately done, it will destroy everything. And unfortunately, then it will look cheap or fake, or we will see that everything is not put together to make something extraordinary. So the first thing I would tell, so it's not really an answer, but if you want to find the magical aspect of it, you have to be sure to be able to do everything, especially for sets and costumes. For sure, there were already at the time some small shows, some acts like Pygmalion by Rameau, which are really less demanding because there are less singers, less dancers, only one decoration, and no machine, nothing is moving on stage. So you can choose also something not so. But if you want to do it also, there is something which is interesting, I think, important, I think, and I tell this even if I have half of myself is a researcher and half of myself is more into artistic part. If you know what was done at the time, you have to focus on the important things. That means some years ago, there was this habit in France, but I think also in Poland, and to use the light of the candles to tell, okay, the candles, it's the magie of the Baroque show. But in fact, not that much. And I really saw some shows where you had your eyes burning after 1 hour because you see nothing with the candle and you cannot look at the stage anymore. And then, in fact, it destroyed part of the magie, because the magical aspect. And so you have to focus on what was really interesting at the time and what they were obliged to do. The light was the main problem for them. You really have to consider this. For staging at the time, the main problem is not to have people on stage to make everybody move, it's just to enlight the stage. And so, for example, the question of the light and the candles is not the first one you have to focus on. But on the opposite, for example, the question of movements, and especially Baroque dance, is very important because for sure, Rameau or Lully, you can do it with modern dance. But really, when you have good Baroque dancer, then you understand why the music is written like that. So for example, the question of gestures and movement is very important. And so you have to share the different aspects and to focus on, okay, this one is fundamental, it's part of the aesthetic. This one is just a technical aspect that they were not able to do in another way, but that nowadays we could do in another way.
Okay, so, well, I hope that one day we will make your dream come true to play it in the full staging and orchestra and singers, like you said during a lecture that you dream about hearing the opera the same as it was. Okay, thank you. But we have some more questions from people. Okay. Did the audience argue about too loud orchestra? Since it was so big, and that the orchestra was too loud in comparison to the singers.
Yes, yes. It's a big problem, and it's a big critique that was done to the opera house that the orchestra was too loud. And they gave the example of the Comédie Italienne, that means the future opera comique, where the orchestra was smaller, and everybody was telling that the orchestra there was perfect, but at the Paris Opera it was too loud, and so the singer were shouting instead of singing. The orchestra was so big that, for example, people tell that it was impossible to hear the harpsichord. And in fact, the harpsichord that nowadays we find so important, and on all the recording we like because the harpsichord did had a good idea to make such counterpoint and so many things. And I know I am speaking to an harpsichord player. But at the time, they tell that even in the recitative, because the recitative were accompanied by 4 cellos unisono, in fact, they tell that they were only hearing the soloist and the bass line, and that it was impossible to hear the harpsichord from another place than the one of the conductor and from the stage for the singers. And so, for example, this is important, you see, because it means that at the time, the harpsichord was not a color or an effect in the orchestra. It was just used because the people who was playing the harpsichord was the teacher of the singer. And he was there in the orchestral pit to help the singer in case of memory troubles or things like that. And as they worked together with all the annotation I showed you, in fact, it was to help them in case of problem. So it was totally a useful, I would tell, attitude and not an aesthetic attitude. And nowadays, because of the microphone and because of all the recording, we use the harpsichord like something, I would tell, decorative. I mean, yes. It's part of the music. But at the time, it was not part of the music because we were not hearing it. And that's why also the harpsichord was not playing in the dances, in the orchestra pieces, and in the choirs. The harpsichord only began to play when a soloist singer arrived on stage, because it will help him to be in tune, in rhythm, and so on. So you can really imagine that the harpsichordist crossed his arms during the overture, during all the dances, and all the choir. And nowadays we cannot imagine this, but it was like that at the time.
Well, very funny, because now, it is like this, that the harpsichord players, everyone says, the most important because it creates everything. Of course.
No.
What can I say? But in fact, helping singers is also very often a serious job. Because, we all know that many things can happen. Okay, we have another question. Do you have any? Do you have your own the favorite source which you use to just develop your thinking about Baroque music? I mean, your very favorite historical source, and what would you recommend to read?
Okay, among the treaties for the singers, I read all of them. The one which are interested, I tell you. You have Mersenne, l'harmonie universelle, It's from 6036. It's quite complicated. It's enormous, but in the middle of it, you will find some things regarding the singers. And I think this is interesting because it shows how much already in 6036, that means 40 years before the invention of the French opera, they already have the idea of the voice, a big voice, small voice, importance of speaking and so on. So this source is important for me because it shows that all the history of the French school of singing comes from very far and even from before the opera. Then, for the treaties, Bassi in 6068, L'Art de bien chanter, is very interesting. It's the beginning of the time of Lully, and it's very detailed. You can already find there everything about the way of speaking, about the way of singing. And Bassi is more interested into what happens in the small concerts, chamber music with luth, that means les airs doublés, airs de cour by Lambert and so on. So he's more or less against the opera. But it's interesting because it speaks about all the different type of voices, way of singing that you can find. And then another treaty very important is the one by Monteclair, Les Principes de musique, divisé à 4 parties in 7036. It's the most detailed for the ornaments and everything else, and the examples are chosen in the opera, especially in GFT by Monteclair himself. There you can find, I would tell, the maximum of detail from what was done during the first half of the century. A lot of people are using the treaty by Bérard in 1750, L'Art du Chant, I think. But unfortunately, Bérard, it's a fake, because 1 year after, you have the traité by Blanchet, and Blanchet, in his traité, he tells that Bérard stole his manuscript and published him under his name, but he did not understand all what himself Blanchet wrote, and so he printed everything with a lot of mistakes, and so Blanchet begins his treaty with 20 pages showing all the mistakes in the treaty by Bérard. But the treaty by Bérard is used because, first, because the printing is very beautiful, but also because there are some scores inside with examples of what to do and what not to do. And it's one of the rare treaties to have musical examples. But I would prefer to use the one by Blanchet, which is the one who was stilled. And it's interesting because you can find a lot of things which are in Bérard, but you can also find a lot of addition, and especially a lot of addition regarding the way of acting on stage that you don't find in Bérard. So these are my favorite treaties. I would tell Mersenne, Bassi, Monteclair, and Blanchet. But then I think what is really interesting, if you want to understand what was done at the time, is to go on the website of the French National Library. It's named Gallica, Gallica. And there, for example, you write Rameau and you select scores. And there you will find a lot of scores by Rameau with a lot of annotation according to what was done during the performances. And there you will open a box directly on the 18th century, so you can check, for example, the manuscript of Naïs or Zaïs, which are Les Paladins. You can find all of them there. And then you will see all the annotation, and this will open your eyes about what is on the score and what was done at the time and what can be done, in fact, at the time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know some of them. Yeah, but we always say that we need post translations because, you know, French for us is very difficult. Not so many people know it. We have usually I speak a little French, but I can read a lot. So some of them I know, but yeah, this is problem to get translation, and even not all of them are translated to English. So it's also problematic to have it. Okay, we have some more from the cello player. Did the cello realize basso continuo? I mean, they played only the line, or they also in recitativos did they play some chords?
No. In fact, we have all these scores used by the singer, but we have also all the material for the orchestra. So in this material, unfortunately, in general, there is no annotation at all. But the fact that there are no annotation in the scores for the singer, for the musicians, show us several things. Either they were not listening to the conductor, but mainly it means that, for example, there was no bowings. So they did what they want with their bows, because if there would have been some bowings, and you can find in the treaty for violin by Monteclair in 1711, you can already find some bowing there. So they could have write them if they were supposed to do all together the same bowings, but not. But what is interesting in these scores is that you see the name of the instrumentalists on the side. And for example, we have some scores that are written Monsieur Monteclair and Monsieur Bertin. And we know that Bertin was the harpsichordist, the harpsichord player, and that Monteclair was the double bass player during the year 70-20, 70-15, 20-25. And so that means the double bass and the harpsichord were sharing the same score. And in this score, for example, first you don't have the overture. It's written ouverture, tacet. First choir, tacet. Rigaudon 1, Rigaudon 2, tacet. And then recitative, puff. And then the harpsichord and the double bass begin to play. So that means, you see, just this, it's amazing. We cannot imagine that in the overture of an opera, the double bass doesn't play and the harpsichord doesn't play. Well, and so if we go back to the question, that means that on the score, there is not the first annotation which will show you that the continuo was orchestrated in one way or the other. That means the idea, here we put the theorbo, here we put the harpsichord, here all together, here the gamba is... No, it's impossible, it's not written. That means it was always everybody playing together. The continuo section at the Paris Opera is totally clear. We know exactly. At the time of Lully, it was 2 gamba, 2 cello, in fact, bass de violon, but more or less later it will be cello, 1 harpsichord, and 2 theorbos, and never 2 harpsichords. So that's it. There were 2 gambas, 2 cellis, that means 4 string basses, plus 2 theorbos, 1 harpsichord, everybody playing all the time. And if you try to do this, and we tried, my dear Dorothea, isn't it? Yes. It works very well, because the sound is not so big, the sound is not boring, but it just gives a big accompaniment to the singer, and in fact, it helps them to be very dramatic and to be everywhere on stage, but to hear the accompaniment. And for the history of this continuo, we know exactly that the first theorbo disappeared in 1731, the second theorbo disappeared in 1734, the first gamba disappeared in 1741, and the second gamba disappeared in 1746. Okay? That means after 1746, you don't have any more theorbos and gambas. And for Hippolyte Arici, you still have 2 gambas and 1 theorbo, for example. So we know the history, and nowadays people, they do as they want or as they can, because it's complicated to have money for such continuo, but we know exactly how it was done at the time. And then in the middle of this, nothing show you, and I did not see the beginning of the first writing about the way that cellists or gamba players were playing chords. And from my point of view, when you don't see that it was done, that means it was not done. That's it. Yeah. If you don't have, I mean, if you have just a single line somewhere, a word somewhere which makes you imagine that, maybe it means, okay, then it opens the door to imagine something. But if you have we have all the score, we have all the treaties, all the printed scores, and nothing, not single proof, that means it was not done, I'm quite sure. And also, I spoke a lot with my theorbo friends. There was no guitar at the Paris Opera, for sure, in the continuo. And if you read the treaty by Campion and other treaties for guitar, it's clearly written that the guitar is a domestic instrument used for private music. And it's written by Campion, right? It's the best instrument to accompany one voice. Okay, but not on stage at the Paris Opera for sure. So when you see all what is done nowadays in Baroque, in French Baroque opera, with the guitar, with the orchestration of the continuo, with people playing chords and so on, this is totally fake. Yeah. And during the time you work on this orchestration of the continuo, you are not working on the right articulation, the right division of the sentences, the right commas, and so on. So unfortunately, I think people should focus to go as far as they can in what we know that was done at the time, thanks to the sources, thanks, for example, to the scores I show you. But they should spend maybe less time to invent exotism, which did not exist there.
Yeah, I remember our conversation.
I am a terrorist. But
yeah, we spoke about the guitar already in the past, so I remember that. Okay, 2 questions. Yeah, what was, in those time of Paris Opera, what was the role of the conductor? I mean, how did it work with the conductor?
Good question. So the conductor had the orchestra in his back and he was in front of the singers. The conductor, in fact, was not only conducting the orchestra, he was more or less conducting the performance. For example, the only place where you find the indication to move the light to make a specific effect of night or day, it's in the score of the conductor. That means the conductor, suddenly he was knocking on the stage, and people down, under the stage, they hear the noise, they say, okay, it's us, we have to move the light now for the second act or the third act. So for example, we see that the conductor is taking care of the full performance and not only conducting the orchestra and the soloists. The conductor, he was not conducting in the recitative and in the arias. At that moment, it was the harpsichordist who was the boss. So the harpsichordist
at least that.
Yeah, yes. And in a Lully opera, the recitative it's more than half of the opera. In fact. So the conductor was only conducting the big masses, that means choir and the full orchestra. We know that on stage, on each side of the stage, but backstage, there were 2 secondary conductors with a big baton doing noise on the stage during the choirs, because during the choirs, it was impossible for everybody to be together. Because either you don't see the conductor very well, or for the orchestra, for the choir, you don't hear the orchestra. And so the only way, and also for the big ballets, the only way to be all together is to have these 2 secondary conductors on each side. They are looking to the principal conductor in the pit, and they are knocking with their baton on the stage so that the stage has kind of vibration and noise. And so you hear boom, boom, boom. This is very important. Why? Because first, when you see all the critique by Rousseau and others about this noise of the baton of the conductor, in fact, they are wrong, because they write that it's the conductor in the pit who do this noise. In fact, these are the conductor on stage who do this noise. So this is the first thing. But then this is musically very important, because if you do this noise with the baton, boom, 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 the interest is to do the less noise possible. That means to beat the less possible, the less you can. And so that's why certainly they beat each bar, because they don't beat each beat for sure, or they don't even beat each half bar, but they only beat on the first beat of the bar. And nowadays it's important because a lot of people, they play this music too slowly. And they have the feeling, for example, if it has 4, they will do tan, ta, tam, pam, pam, pa, pam, pi, pam. But if you beat only 1 beat per bar, it will be tan, ta, tam, pam, pam, pa, pam, pi, pam, pa, pim, pim, pa. And if you understand this, it changes all the feeling of the music. Because then you understand, and just, it's funny, and if you can translate, because in English I don't know, but the name of the conductor at the time is batteur de mesure. That means the one who beats the bar. And so that means that really is doing his noise on each bar. It's in his title. He is the batteur de mesure. So pam pa 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 pam pa pam pi pam pa. But year after year and one century after, if the feeling is always the same, to have only one important beat per bar, it changes all the way you will sing the music, but also all the way you will write the music. So this way of conducting is really linked with the way the music is written and with the way you have to sing or to perform it. So keep this idea that the conductor only beats the bar, the first beat of the bar, and sometimes maybe each 2 bars, and then you will find the right intention for the music itself.
Right, then we need even more people to perform this opera.
Yeah, two more.
Two more.
But
Okay.
Marcin and you can be there on the side.
Yeah, Marcin, our conductor, can easily do that. I think he would love to be this man who beats on the stage. Yes.
But you know that Lully died because of this.
I know.
Because he was beating the baton and then poof.
Wow, nice job. Okay, one more question we have. Well, was there in those times, was there a main regisseur? I mean, to the director to make all the staging and choreography, some main
Stage director?
Yeah, stage director. Yeah, something like that. That
No.
invented everything on the stage.
Yeah. So it's well. At the time, there was not one responsible for the staging. You have one doing the costumes, one doing the decoration, and the singers, they were not staged. Nobody told them, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to go there, then go there, then go there.
Okay.
In fact, when they were not in a machine, they came in the middle of the stage in front of the orchestra. They sing, they don't move, they only do some gestures and attitude, but I mean, it's tradition. Nobody tells, oh, you should cry like that. They know exactly because they sing always the same type of role, so they know how to cry, they know how to die, they know how to... we only know that the composer and the poet, they were allowed to be there during all the rehearsal to help their interpreters. So certainly they were helping them for music, but certainly also for the way how to act. But first of all, you have to know that before the beginning of the 19th century, there was no idea of a stage director. But apart from this, yes, there were people very famous for all the question of what was done on stage. You have famous choreographer. In general, they are all famous dancer who became then famous choreographer. Like at the time of Louis XIV, Ballon or Pécourt, and later at the time of Gluck, Gardel or Vestris. They were very famous for their choreographies. And Nover, for sure. For the decoration, the sets, sometimes it was the same who were doing the sets and the costumes. For example, Bérain, at the time of Louis XIV, we have a lot of drawings by him for sets and also for costumes. And also the Italian Vigarani, more or less at the same times. Later, you have Bocquet for the costumes and Boulet for the sets. And at the end of the 18th century, you have sometimes some painters like Boucher, who did also some costumes for the Paris Opera. And the last very famous guy for the sets is Pierre-Adrien Paris. He was a famous architect, but he also did some sets during 10 years for the Paris Opera. And we have all his collection of drawings at the library of Besançon, where he died. And it's very interesting because we have 400 drawings of optional sets for the Paris Opera.
Okay, so, well, if we don't need any main stage director, then if singers are coming, then I can say them, yeah, you should know what to do. Yes, I mean, yeah,
because
this is perfect.
The situations are always the same. For sure, there are some moments very complicated, but in the middle of the 18th century, for example, they stopped to put the singers in the machine because it was too dangerous. Mm-hmm. So in fact, you have, and you see in the costumes that, for example, for Armide in 1761, the last revival of the Lully version, there are 3 costumes for Armide. because in fact you have one for the main armide, the singer, and two for ladies which are dressed like armide for going in the sky. And it was not Armide herself. That means it was the second and the third Armide in the sky doing the complicated thing, not singer, but people paid for this. And for example, the singers, they only come, they sing, and all what was happening everywhere else, it was not them. And even to be even less expensive, during the 18th century, they put some kind of puppets or fake people in the machine, dressed like normal people, but not moving at all, because it was less expensive and less dangerous in case of accidents, because there were a lot of accidents at the time. So really, a singer comes in the middle, sings. There is one scene where the princess is hoping, one scene when she's crying, one scene when she will die. And so it's always the same situation. And so each actress look at the other one. And so there is a kind of tradition of interpretation. And some, the best one, like Sophie Arnoux, they invent or they try new things, but they do it on their own, and they don't have. We know that there were connections with the Comédie Française and the actors of the Comédie Française. So sometimes maybe they had some lesson with actors from this theater, but there was not someone responsible for this officially at the Paris Opera.
And I suppose all the singers were also, good dancers, isn't it? I mean, they had to dance.
At the time of Louis XIV, yes. And we have a lot of engravings, which show us, it's written, Mademoiselle Moreau dancing and singing at the Paris Opera. But in general, they were singers able to dance, but to dance a little bit in the divertissement. But this was only for the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century. But after 1720, more or less, the singer don't dance anymore. You have only some roles composed by Rameau for Mademoiselle Puvigné and Mademoiselle Mariette, which are roles for dancers which are supposed to sing a little bit. And you have 4 or 5 operas like that. You have in Les Fêtes d'Hébé by Rameau, the role of Aiglé, which is supposed to dance and sing. You have the role of the statue in Pygmalion. And you have the role of a shepherdess in Naïs and another one in Acanthe et ses fils. They were very complicated, but they were nice moments for the dancers of the ballet to show that they were able to sing. But they were created by Mademoiselle Puvigné. She was only 14 years old, or 12 even, very young, and she was able to dance and to sing. And so after her, for the revivals, for the other, it was quite complicated because they were not singing very well.
Okay, thank you very much. We have still one more question, the last one. How long was the rehearsals? I mean, how big amount of time you needed to prepare such an opera? I mean, in those times.
We know exactly. For the very first opera, La Pastorale d'Issy by Cambert, it was 6 months, but it was the very first. And then immediately for Pomone, the second opera, it was only 1 month. So after the creation of the opera, immediately they entered in a logical of going quite. In general, the regulation asks that there should not be more than 3 weeks between the first rehearsal and the first performance. But in general, if we check, it's in general 1 month to bring an opera from the first rehearsal to the first performance. It can be more, but in general, it's around 1 month. In fact, the work is divided. People work separately. On one side, the orchestra. On the other side, the singers with the harpsichordist at the school. On the other side, the choir. And on the other side, the ballet. They divide the work. And they have altogether between 7 and 10 rehearsals all together on the main stage. We know it. And after this, there is 1 or 2 dress rehearsals.
And that's it.
But that means during 3 weeks, you can do separate works, and then 7 to 10 all together rehearsals, and 2 dress rehearsals. For a creation. And certainly for revivals, it was really less. We don't know. But then we have a lot of indication of first performances, which were not good at all because it was still, people tell you, but it's still a rehearsal. It's not a performance. Well, okay. But I mean, normally everybody was for the revivals, they knew the repertory because they spend their time doing this. And just you have to link these rehearsals. The rehearsals, they were from 9 to 1 in the morning for the separate one. And the one on the theater, they were from 5 to 22 in the evening. So one general was could be 5 hours. The day of the general was, the day of the rehearsal was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because the day of the performances were Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday during winter. That means sometimes they were working all the week, each evening, either rehearsing or performing. But normally, when they begin to rehearse a new opera, they are supposed to perform it 3 weeks after, but during that time, they are performing another opera on the main stage. And then when they begin the rehearsal, the first singers and the first dancer, they stop to be in the performances, and they dedicate themselves only to the rehearsal of the new opera. And so at that moment, you have the covers who arrive on the main stage to sing the opera which is proposed to the audience. And in fact, people tell each time that when they don't see the first singers and the first dancer anymore, then the opera collapses because nobody wants to come and to listen to the covers. And so in general, there is a precipitation of the end of the performances because nobody wants to come anymore, because the main singers and main dancers are dedicated to the rehearsals. That's why the rehearsals have to be short, because the opera want, in general, when they ask the cover to come on the main stage, they want this to be the less long, as short as possible, in fact. So that's why they're asking, they want to rehearse quite fast so that the new opera can come soon. But it's interesting to know this, and you have just to consider that there were only 2 weeks break each year during the time of Easter, but they were performing during all the year and rehearsing during all the year.
And now everyone is
complaining
saying we
and
have
not
to,
complaining. The career was 15 years long. You can ask to retire after 15 years. Lot of people did this, but some were singing during 20, 25, or 30 years. There is even a bass who sang some small role as a soloist during 50 years. But you imagine that the ladies, they enter at the opera around 15 years old. That means they can retire at 30 years old. But at the time, a lot of people will die at 40 years old. But not everybody. That means if you are retired at 30 years old, then you will go to the church during 2 or 3 years because you were an artist, which was not good for the social and sacred aspects. So you have to dedicate yourself to save your life during 2 or 3 years. Then you can get married, and then you can have a second part of your life more normal and no more as an artist. And that's why all the ladies in France working at the opera house, they are named Mademoiselle and not Madame, because they cannot marry as long as they are actresses, because they are, I don't know, it's because they are excommunicated by the church. And so they cannot marry. And that's why they are told Mademoiselle and not Madame. It's not because everybody is polite. And the first who broke this is first the Revolution and then Napoleon. That's why at the time of Napoleon, you have the first Madame coming on stage, like Madame Branchu, because she's married, but she's also a singer.
Yeah, I mean, modern times are better for many reasons.
Yes.
Okay, we have no more questions, I think. Thank you, Benoît, very much. It was great pleasure to meet you again. I hope not the last one. And
No.
well, we had fun. I hope you did too. So thank you very much. And well, I hope that we meet one day on the performance of opera, which you prepare with a full, orchestra, choir, and solist as your dream. And well, then I would like to hear it too. So
I think I will have some opportunities to come in Warsaw because the Chamber Opera Theater in Warsaw, I think is quite interesting in French Baroque music
yes,
because they did an Armide in collaboration with us some years ago. And I know that they are preparing Castor et Pollux with
yes.
Deda Cristina Colonna. It was postponed, but it will happen, I'm quite sure. And I think they spoke about other titles by Lully and other. So the concert or the room is not really the right size for a big French Baroque opera. But I think they are very involved into French Baroque music, and that's great. And I hope to come to see it and to meet you. For sure.
Yes, and personally, I must say that, here in Bydgoszcz, our music academy in Bydgoszcz is a partner of a festival which organizes is by our society. So maybe one day on our festival will be also French opera that we can invite you and to see what will happen. So let's make our let's make our dreams come true one day.
We will. We will.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you very much, Benoît.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye bye.